first, the tough questions.
Did you kill Ashley Pond and Miranda Gaddis?
No, I did not.
So if you didn't kill Ashley and Miranda, then how did they wind up in your backyard?
Public property.
3 generations of a family are now accused killers. Digging deeper into a murder in Canby today, we found out that one of the suspects in this case is the son of infamous killer Ward Weaver.
This is a story about fear, heartache, and missed opportunities. It ends right here on this barren piece of land in Oregon City, where a house once stood. It begins with Ashley Pond and Miranda Gaddis, who they were before they became known as 2 missing girls.
It's not often that serial killing runs in families, but that was the case for the Weavers. It seemed darkness was interwoven into the family's DNA, with Weaver's son continuing in his father and grandfather's path. In early 2002, Ashley Pond disappeared while on her way to the bus stop. As the authorities launched a desperate search for her, they had little idea that the man responsible had been there all along, hiding in plain sight. But the investigators would figure this out far too late, with a second young girl going missing from the same town. Welcome back to Cold Case Diaries, where we shed light on mysterious cases from around the world. Today, we delve into the case of Ashley Pond and Miranda Gaddis. But first, if you still haven't subscribed to our channel, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click on the bell icon below, as it motivates us to create more intriguing content for you. So, without further ado, let's dive right into this mystery. Oregon City, Oregon, lies 20 miles from the state's largest city of Portland. In the year 2000, shortly before our case took place, the population sat at around 25,000. Much of the city lies along the Willamette River, with other parts overlooking the water. The local law enforcement department dealt with minor crimes often, like domestic disputes and burglaries, but nothing like the events that unfolded in 2002. On January 9, 2002, 12-year-old Ashley Marie Pond was getting ready for her day at school. Ashley left her home shortly after 8 a.m., kissing her mother goodbye as she closed the door behind her. She was slightly behind schedule for the school bus, but she proceeded to walk along South Beaver Creek Road to the bus stop. The walk would take Ashley less than 10 minutes, and she knew the route like the back of her hand. It was a typical cold winter day in Oregon, and Ashley kept her coat tightly held against her as she powered along. Ashley was a well-liked student at Gardner Middle School. She was in 7th grade and a valued member of the school's dance team, the Fallen Angels. Ashley was also a talented swimmer. She was born on March 1st, 1989, to her then 16-year-old mother, Lori Davis. As a young child, Ashley lived with her mother and her mother's high school boyfriend, David Pond. Since David was the only father figure in Ashley's life, she always just assumed that he was her dad, something that her mother didn't try to dissuade her from doing. When Ashley was right around 8 or 9, Lori divorced David. When this happened, Ashley found out the truth. David was not her father. Lori and David had been involved in a dispute around child support payments when the topic of a paternity test was brought up. It confirmed that David Pond was not Ashley's father. Her real father was a man named Wesley Rotger. It had been a tough few years for Ashley, but she tried her best not to let it get her down. Lori wasn't expecting her daughter home early that day. She had dance practice scheduled that afternoon. But when late afternoon slid into early evening, she began to worry. It was 6 p.m., and Ashley still wasn't back yet. Lori decided to call the school and find out if they had any information for her. She was horrified to learn that Ashley hadn't even made it to school that day. As the teachers had already gone home for the day, Lori was finding it increasingly difficult to speak to anyone who might know something about her daughter's whereabouts. Lori then turned to dialing the homes of various close friends of Ashley. None of the girls had seen her that day. The thought of Ashley running away briefly crossed Lori's mind, so she darted to her daughter's room to see if any of her clothing or special items were missing. Everything was the same as it had been every previous day. Lori was now confident that something was seriously wrong. She dialed the Oregon City Police Department and reported Ashley missing, describing her as 5 feet 3 inches tall and 110 pounds with brown eyes and brunette hair. The detectives assigned to the case began investigating right away, choosing first to speak with some of her classmates. This is when they learned that Ashley never made it onto the bus. As the other children piled on at 8:19 a.m., Ashley was nowhere to be seen. A massive search was launched, which included canine units trying to see what Ashley's last movements had been. The window of space where she could have vanished from was fairly small, but investigators knew if this was a case of an abduction, Ashley could be anywhere by now. Despite looking into local offenders, checking Ashley's internet search history, and speaking to her friends, the investigators were no closer to finding out what happened to Ashley. The investigators learned about the issues in Ashley's home life, like the situation with her father, so they didn't dismiss the idea of her possibly running away, even though Lori didn't feel this was the case. However, there were no confirmed sightings of her that proved this theory. 10 days after Ashley was last seen, the Oregon City Police Department reached out to the FBI. They were at a loss for where to go next and needed assistance to focus on the possibility that Ashley had been abducted. As the agents began looking into the case, it was quite obvious this would need some expertise to solve. They had no crime scene, no witnesses, and no suspects. A special task force was put together consisting of investigators from multiple agencies, like the Oregon State Police and the Clackamas County Sheriff's Department, along with neighboring agencies. FBI Special Agent Charles Matthews was placed in charge of heading up the task force. They began intensive questioning, and everyone around Ashley, like her friends, family, acquaintances, and teachers, made use of Boy Scouts to distribute missing persons posters with Ashley's image and information. A trained canine and his handler visited each house in the neighborhood where Ashley disappeared, hoping the dog would alert him to something that could push the investigation forward. One of the first houses he searched lay directly across the street from Ashley's apartment complex. It belonged to a man called Ward Weaver III. When the agent approached Weaver, he denied his entry to his home, but allowed him to search his backyard since the dog didn't alert to Ashley's presence. The officer moved on. As they looked further into Ashley's background, the investigators made a worrying discovery. His biological father, Wesley Rodiger, had been abusing Ashley for years. He was indicted on 20 counts of indecent assault and 20 counts of sodomy. After Ashley found out the heartbreaking news that David was not her father, she tried to get to know Wesley in the hopes that she could form a bond with her biological dad. This is when the abuse began. Those around Ashley noticed that she often seemed on edge and quick to anger after coming home from visits with Wesley. Ashley eventually refused to go over to his house and told her mother what had been happening. Shockingly, Wesley got off with little more than a slap on the wrist. He took a plea bargain, and the case never went to trial. He was given 10 years on probation. During this legal proceeding, Ashley told the deputy district attorney that there was another man who was abusing her. It is unclear why this information was never pursued, and this inaction would have deadly consequences. In early April, almost 3 months since Ashley disappeared, the investigators found some new information. Ashley began spending time in the Weaver home, where a close school friend, Mallory Weaver, lived with her family. This was due to an increased number of domestic disputes in the Pond apartment. Mallory's father, Ward Weaver III, was 39 years old at the time. He had moved his family to the neighborhood a few years prior. Ashley and her friend, Miranda Gaddis, both became close with Mallory Weaver since they all attended the same middle school. Ashley frequently had sleepovers at the Weavers, with Ward Weaver himself dropping Ashley and his daughter off at school the following day. What seemed like an innocent enough relationship slowly started to pop up red flags. On one of these occasions, when Weaver dropped Ashley at school, a teacher witnessed him kiss her on the lips. This teacher didn't brush the disturbing interaction off. They went to the principal and filed a report, but nothing seemed to come of it. In the year leading up to Ashley's disappearance, her sleepovers at the Weavers' home stretched into longer and longer visits. Ashley even went with the family on vacation in California. But there was a shift in Ashley after these 2 weeks away. She told her mother that Weaver had been molesting her and began spending all her time back home. Ashley also spoke to one of her teachers about this, telling them that Weaver said he would take the stand against her if her father's case went to trial. It now made sense that Weaver was the second individual that Ashley mentioned to the deputy district attorney. Instead of trying to fade into the background, Weaver decided to tackle Ashley's claims head-on. He even called a close relative of hers and said Ashley would never be allowed back in his house after her allegations. "I've completely washed my hands of her," he said. "She just ruined the relationship." Naturally, learning all of this about Weaver and Ashley's relationship, the investigators working on her case began looking further into Weaver and his potential involvement. It seemed violence was interwoven into the very fabric of the Weaver family line. Ward Weaver III was born on April 16, 1963, in California's Humboldt County, to parents Trish and Ward Weaver Jr. Weaver's father abandoned the family when he was just 4 years old. Weaver's mother remarried a man called Bob Budow, who was a violent alcoholic. In 1981, Weaver had graduated high school and was living with his mother in Portland. It was here that he had his first run-in with the law when he was accused of assaulting one of his female relatives. In the end, no charges were pressed. This was allegedly because Weaver had enlisted in the U.S. Navy Reserve a few months earlier. Since he was set to leave in the coming weeks, the Multnomah County Juvenile Court report stated, quote, "It was useless to pursue the abuse charge." Weaver left Portland and was stationed in the Philippines on an aircraft carrier. His stint with the Navy wouldn't last long, however. He left in May 1982 after missing shifts while out drinking. While he was stationed in the Philippines, he met Maria Stout, a young Filipina woman. She moved back with Weaver to Portland. Unfortunately for Maria, her time with Weaver would be anything but pleasant. After being in the United States for less than 2 months, Maria was admitted to a hospital in North Poland after Weaver slapped her and hit her head against the bed frame. A police officer was brought in to speak with Maria, who was 5 months pregnant at the time, but she refused to pursue legal action against Weaver. He was only 19 years old when this incident occurred and was already showing worrying signs of what was to come. News of this sort of behavior wouldn't have come as much of a surprise to those who knew Weaver growing up. As he entered his early teenage years, Weaver had developed a noticeably antisocial temperament and frequently beat up his half-brother, Robert Boudreau. In December 1982, Maria and Weaver had their first child, a son named Francis Paul Weaver. For the next 2 years, the young family remained in Portland before relocating to Bakersfield, California. While Weaver was there, he visited his father, who happened to be in jail awaiting trial for capital murder. You see, in 1981, Weaver's father, Ward Weaver Jr., murdered 18-year-old Robert Radford and his 23-year-old girlfriend, Barbara LeVoy. I will refer to Weaver's father as Ward to avoid confusion. The young people's car had broken down in the late evening when Ward drove past them in his red flatbed truck. He never confessed why he did what he did next, but Ward continued driving down the road before making a U-turn up ahead and driving back to where Robert and Barbara were. Many believe it was Barbara who caught his eye. He pulled up alongside them and offered to give them a lift to Mojave. The couple accepted and climbed up into Ward's truck. It was wintertime, and the desert temperatures dropped significantly at nightfall. If only Robert and Barbara had known, they were far safer out there than they were in Ward's truck. Ward drove for about 5 miles before he pulled over, asking Robert to get out and help him readjust something in the flatbed. Robert was happy to help, leaving Barbara inside the vehicle out of the cold night air. As Robert bent over to help, Ward struck him over the back of the head with a sizable metal pipe. He continued beating him until Robert was unconscious with fatal injuries. Ward then got back into the cab with Barbara, threatening her with a knife. He made her lean down in his truck with her hands behind her back. Ward then began the drive to Bakersfield. After driving for hours, Ward pulled over and assaulted Barbara. He then continued towards San Francisco, where he had to unload his flatbed, stopping a second time to assault her again. As Ward got closer to San Francisco, Robert was found on the side of the road by a passing motorist. He was still clinging to life. The motorist called emergency services, and paramedics were promptly at the scene. Unfortunately, there was nothing they could do. Robert Radford died on his way to the hospital. Police found Robert's wallet on his body, which meant they could quickly identify who the young man was. Eventually, they connected Robert to his broken-down vehicle where the couple had been when Ward picked them up. Much to the authorities' concern, they discovered a purse and luggage set belonging to a woman. Inside the purse were Barbara LeVoy's identification documents. A missing person report was issued for Barbara, and a search began to try to locate her. Ward made it to San Francisco and then continued to Oroville, California, where he lived. Barbara was still alive at this point. Before Ward reached Oroville, Ward bound Barbara's hands and feet with tape. When he went to gag her, she bit his thumb. Ward then strangled her to death right then and there. We'll never know what his eventual plan was for Barbara. Was he going to strangle her later anyway? Or did he become enraged after she bit him? Ward then found a secluded spot outside of Oroville and buried Barbara in a shallow grave. He then drove to the restaurant his wife worked at and got into her car. Ward drove back to where he had buried Barbara and dug her back up. He drove her body back home, hoping to bury her in his backyard. When he discovered his children were still awake, Ward had to come up with a lie to get them to stay inside while he moved Barbara's body. Ward told his children he had gotten into a serious fight with another man, using the wound on his thumb as proof. He added that the man may come to look for him, so they had to stay inside where it was safe. Ward then went back outside and carried Barbara into the backyard. He placed her in a ready-made trench, which was supposed to be used for a new sewer line, and he reburied her body. Ward wouldn't leave Barbara there, though. Sometime later, he moved her to a deeper hole he had dug in his yard. He then built a raised deck over her body, sealing the top of the grave in concrete. As the investigators continued trying to find Barbara and track down Robert's killer, Ward was charged and convicted of an unrelated crime. He was in San Quentin, and the police first connected him to the crime after a fellow inmate came forward with some information. Ward allegedly admitted to murdering Robert and Barbara, giving specific details of the crime. When the inmate spoke to investigators, he was able to tell them Barbara may be buried at Ward's home in Oroville. Now, the investigators had a name. They began digging into Ward's history. The crime he had been convicted of also involved a pair of couple. Ward was driving down the I-5 when he spotted a young man and a 16-year-old girl thumbing for a lift. He drove the two along the California coast, stopping in Oxnard to call a friend. It's not clear what Ward said to his friend, but it involved the two people he had in his vehicle. Ward's friend arrived, and the young man was made to go with him. Ward kept the girl. Over the next few days, she was repeatedly assaulted, while Ward continued back to Oroville. Once she was inside his home, Ward kept her locked in a closet, only bringing her out to assault her again. As for the young man's fate, Ward's friend took him to a remote area and shot him 3 times in the head. He was then thrown down a hill. By some sheer stroke of luck, he survived, clawing his way back up where he was rescued by a passing motorist. He was rushed to hospital and was able to give the authorities information about Ward and the vehicle he had been driving. The red flatbed truck was unique, so it didn't take long for Ward's name to come up. For some reason, Ward spared the girl. He found himself unable to take her life, so he drove her out to a secluded area and left her there. Ward was convicted of repeated assaults, kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit murder. His friend was also charged for his role in the crimes. Both men were handed life sentences. When the investigators focused on solving Barbara and Robert's case and heard this information about Ward Weaver Jr., they hurriedly got a search warrant for the Oroville home. When they arrived, the investigators spoke to Ward's wife and asked her for permission to search their yard. She allowed them to, and Ward's son pointed out the deck his father had built. Once they got it removed and began excavating, they found the body of Barbara LeVoy. Kern County Sheriff Department Sergeants Gary Davis and Glenn Johnson traveled to Folsom Prison, where Ward had been brought for questioning. They spent 3 days interviewing him. Ward admitted to the crimes committed against Robert Radford and Barbara LeVoy, even telling the sergeants about his various assaults on the young woman. He drew them a map pointing out the spot where he first buried Barbara. When the sergeants traveled to that location, they found a patch of dirt that looked as if it had previously been dug up. The case against Ward went to trial, and he was found guilty of both murders. Ward told the court that he began hearing a female's voice in his head when he was 17 years old. When he was serving in Vietnam, a male voice appeared. Ward admitted he loved the violence that took place there, happily shooting anyone who stumbled across his path. Ward spent a great deal of time telling the courtroom about these voices and added that he was using amphetamines to help him stay awake on long hauls. Ward said when he murdered Robert and Barbara, he hadn't slept for over a week. Once the jury concluded their deliberation, they not only found him guilty of the charges, but also recommended he be put to death. The judge agreed with that, and Ward Weaver Jr. remains on death row to this day. Going back to Ward's son, in August 1984, Weaver married Maria, and the newlyweds soon welcomed a second son, Alex. 2 years later, in mid-1986, Weaver had another run-in with the law, but this time it would result in a prison sentence. He had spent the evening drinking himself into a stupor. The additions of marijuana and some powdered speed didn't help the situation. Weaver had been set off after a fight with his wife and was picked up outside a bowling alley by some of his friends' young daughters. As they were driving him home, Weaver asked them to pull over so he could relieve himself. In a bizarre attack, Weaver then hit one of the girls over the head with a concrete block he picked up outside. He then put the young driver in a headlock. This behavior led to Weaver getting a 3-year prison sentence. He got out in January of 1988. That same year, the family moved to Canby, Oregon. Maria put up with Weaver for a few more years until she couldn't take his abuse any longer. In 1993, she filed a restraining order against him, and they divorced. Weaver soon got involved with another woman. This time, it was 18-year-old Christy Sloan. Weaver was 31 at the time. The relationship quickly turned sour as Weaver's violent tendencies came to the surface. He was arrested for attacking Christy with a cast-iron skillet. In the end, Christy dropped the charges as she was too fearful of Weaver to testify against him. After a few months, Weaver convinced Christy to get back with him. The pair married in February 1996. While Weaver was still legally married to Christy, he began seeing another woman. In August 1997, he and his new woman moved in together in a house on South Beaver Creek Road. This house was just down the road from Ashley Pond. The investigators in charge of Ashley's case wanted to follow up on Weaver's movements on the day she disappeared. They learned that he had arrived at work at 9:30 a.m. His workplace was not far from his home, so the drive wouldn't have taken Weaver very long. Many who later revived the case were surprised that a direct connection between Ashley and Weaver wasn't drawn sooner. The Portland Tribune reported that people had gone to the police with their concerns about Weaver's relationship with Ashley once she disappeared, but they were brushed off. One example of this came from one of Lori's former boyfriends. He called the authorities to notify them of Weaver's inappropriate relationship with Ashley. The specific incident he referenced happened when this ex-boyfriend was over at Lori's home when Weaver arrived. At one point, Ashley sat on his lap and kissed him. The fact that Weaver was brazen enough to allow this in front of others, let alone in front of Ashley's family, was deeply concerning. The fact that this wasn't a glaring red flag to the investigators is baffling. Another example of this came from one of Ashley's relatives on her mother's side. Ashley had visited her house the week before she disappeared and revealed some information to the relative's oldest daughter while she was there. Ashley told her that on one occasion, Weaver didn't allow her to leave his home when she wanted to. Ashley's friend, Miranda Gaddis, saw this happen. As Ashley got towards the front door, Weaver placed himself directly in front of her, pressing his entire body into her. When Ashley's relative told the investigators about this incident, she said she was never given a call back. Miranda Gaddis was born on November 18, 1988, in Oregon City. Miranda was described as a strong-willed young girl. She dreamed of one day becoming a model and moving out of Oregon City, where she had lived since she was born. Sadly, like Ashley, Miranda had also experienced some extreme trauma at an early age. In fact, much of Miranda's life mirrored Ashley's. Her biological father had run-ins with the law for indecent assault charges, and spent 19 months in prison for assault charges relating to underage girls. Once Miranda's father was behind bars, her mother began a relationship with another man. He began abusing Miranda soon after. In 1999, the man was indicted on many abuse charges, split between Miranda and 2 other girls. He was sent to prison for those crimes. When Miranda found out about Ashley's disappearance, she went to the authorities and alerted them to Weaver's behavior towards her friend. Still, they seemed no closer to finding out what happened to Ashley. And before that question could be answered, another young girl vanished. On March 8, 2002, Miranda's mom left home at 7:30 a.m. to head off for work. The bus to school would be arriving roughly an hour later. So, Miranda ate her breakfast and caught up on some schoolwork before leaving home for the short walk to the bus stop. In an eerily similar disappearance to that of Ashley Pond, Miranda vanished on her way there. She didn't arrive at school that day. Miranda's mom only found out about this around midday after Miranda's friends noted her absence, resulting in someone contacting her mother. Panic washed over her instantly. It had been just 2 months since Ashley's disappeared, and her daughter was missing too. The Oregon City Police now had 2 unexplained disappearances on their hands. 2 groups were established to focus on the cases individually while still trying to connect them. It still seemed like a monstrous task despite having help from multiple agencies. Other than the information about Weaver, they had nothing to go on. There were no crime scenes, no witnesses, and no bodies. Perhaps it is important to mention that a thorough look into potential suspects other than Weaver revealed a significant number of registered offenders in the Oregon city limits, with some of these people living in the direct vicinity of Ashley and Miranda. While it may seem obvious in hindsight that the focus should have been on him, there was clearly a remarkable number of unsavory characters living in the area. If you recall, a search dog had already been utilized early in Ashley's investigation, but it failed to turn up any clues. When an independent canine handler heard of Miranda's disappearance, they approached both girls' parents and asked if they could use an item of their clothing to try and see if their dog could locate something of interest. Initial searches along the routes the girls took turned up nothing. Undeterred, the handler then walked his dog over to the Weaver home. Like it happened the first time around, the canine was allowed onto the property, but not into the home. Weaver also gave express instructions not to go near a slab of concrete in the backyard. He explained that it had not been yet cured, and he didn't want the man's dog messing with it. The man, suspicious of this slab, took his dog there anyway. When the dog caught the scent, he began indicating that human remains were nearby. Despite the man turning this information over to the investigators, they failed to act. In July, Weaver strangely granted an interview with KATU News, where he admitted he was the FBI's prime suspect.
In July, Weaver granted me his first television interview. He revealed then his belief that the FBI considered him the prime suspect in the disappearances of Ashley and Miranda, though he denied doing anything wrong. We asked him for a tour of his home, since he claimed he had nothing to hide. He walked me over the concrete slab as he talked about keeping track of his daughter's young friends while they were at his home.
The months passed quickly, and soon it was August, and Weaver was making plans to skip town. On August 15th, Weaver asked his stepson Francis's girlfriend to help him move some of his items into the yard. Out of nowhere, he attacked the 19-year-old by cornering her in the bathroom. After he assaulted her, Weaver began strangling her. It was as if he wanted to commit one final murderous act before vanishing. Unfortunately for him, things didn't work out like he had hoped. His stepson's girlfriend was able to escape, running into the street nude, except for the shower curtain she had wrapped around her. In a desperate attempt to escape, Weaver dropped everything and fled. The police were quickly notified of the crime after the victim found help, and Weaver was stopped at the city limits by the Oregon City Police. Weaver was taken into custody and charged with violating his son's girlfriend.
On August 13th, Weaver was arrested for allegedly raping his son's 19-year-old girlfriend. The woman ran out of his house, covered only in a blue tarp, claiming Weaver had tried to kill her.
A week later, Weaver's stepson came forward with information that led to a search warrant being issued for his father's house. Francis told investigators that his stepfather had confessed to doing bad things, but he didn't specify what these things were. Francis believed they involved Ashley and Miranda. On August 23, 2002, a judge approved a search warrant. Weaver's home was blocked off, and a thorough search began. 40 investigators were on the scene the following day, examining every inch of the property. Naturally, the concrete slab drew attention quickly, and the process began of slowly chipping away at it. Once they were a foot or so down, they uncovered a 55-gallon barrel. Inside that barrel were the remains of 12-year-old Ashley Pond. Inside the garden shed, tucked away in a cardboard box, they found Miranda Gaddis. Ward Weaver III was charged with multiple counts of aggravated murder, assault, and abuse against Ashley and Miranda. The medical examiner who conducted their autopsies was unable to rule on their causes of death due to the condition of their remains. The examiner did believe that Ashley had been frozen at one point before being buried inside the barrel. The same went for Miranda before she was placed into the box. On April 22, 2004, Weaver's legal team presented a case of Weaver's mental illness to Clackamas County Judge Robert Herndon. The claim Weaver suffered from severe depression and therefore could not aid in his own defense, a right for all people facing charges. While he was in prison awaiting trial, Weaver carved his daughter's name into his arm and sliced open his chest. The prosecution and the defense brought in psychiatrists to examine Weaver, both of whom told the judge that his mental state was impaired. Judge Herndon ordered Weaver to be sent to a mental hospital in Salem. There he would receive more in-depth evaluation and treatment if needed. The family and friends of Ashley and Miranda couldn't believe the news. They likely felt that this monster would get away with his crimes. But this wasn't the case. By mid-2004, Weaver was sent back to Clackamas County, where he was to stand trial. But before this could happen, Weaver made a deal. In exchange for the death penalty being taken off the table, he would plead guilty to the murders. He was sentenced 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Judge Herndon didn't hold back when addressing Weaver. "I see nothing but evil. I believe everyone probably shares the hope that there is a special place in hell for people like you," he said. Weaver was shipped off to Snake River Correctional Institution, where he was kept in segregation. This was for his own protection. Inmates didn't take kindly to predators like Weaver, but the prison could only protect him for so long. In March 2007, 44-year-old inmate Marvin Lee Taylor, who was a barber, was left alone with Weaver. As Marvin stood behind Weaver cutting his hair, he then plunged a shank into his neck. Marvin continued his attack, stabbing the shank multiple times into Weaver. Had a guard not stepped in when he did, Weaver would have likely died. In 2014, Francis Weaver was involved in a shooting that resulted in the death of a marijuana dealer.
So we checked it out and we confirmed with investigators that Francis Weaver, arrested in Canby, is in fact Ward Weaver's son. Francis is one of 3 people now who are accused of killing Edward Spangler in what police believe was a drug-related crime. Now, his father, Ward Weaver, as a lot of you know, is serving 2 life sentences right now for the murders of Ashley Pond and Miranda Gaddis.
He was sentenced to life in prison, adding to a line of Weaver men who will die behind bars. What do you think of today's case? Share your thoughts in the comment section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating true crime stories. Until next time, stay safe and keep your eyes peeled for the next mystery to unfold.